Thank you, Lee. Now, Megan, could you tell me about your origins as a YouTuber and just how you got to where you were?
Sure. I started doing YouTube because I wanted to build a portfolio for myself for jobs in traditional media like television and stuff like that. And as I started making these sketches online, I realized that I was having so much fun doing them, and they were kind of, people were watching them, which was crazy and weird to me. So I just kept doing them, and here I am today.
Now, your one video, that Ray Rice video, that got 2 million views. Why do you think that is?
I think the timing was good for that video. I think it's a really awful thing that happened. A lot of people were talking about it, and it was just outrageous the way the NFL reacted. They knew about the video back in April, and they chose to hush it and not talk about it. And then when that information came out, it just like exploded. I mean, it's outrageous that celebrities in this day and age can get away with doing something as atrocious as hitting someone and just keep their job and continue to be a celebrity. So I think it just like hit at the right time, I would say.
Okay, now I want to stay on the Ray Rice video.
Okay.
You use sort of satire as a platform to make a comment about problems in our society and getting your point across. Can you maybe just explain your process?
My process is, it varies from video to video. In terms of the Ray Rice video, that was me sort of wanting to marry my love of makeup tutorials with something. I really like using makeup tutorials as a format because it's so clearly, the way you put on makeup it's such a clear step-by-step process. Like first you put on foundation and then you do your eye primer and whatever, in that order. So it really lends itself to like a setup punchline kind of format. In terms of the Ray Rice video, the actual content, I really had a problem with what was going on and the way that the media was treating Ray Rice and the way that the media was treating Janae Rice and the Rice incident in general. So I was sort of trying to figure out how to make a statement on that without going for something, cheap and terrible and victim blaming. So blending those two things together, sort of a bunch of scribblies like the Good Will Hunting like chalkboard, like with all the equations. And I'm kidding, I didn't do that, but no, it just sort of like came together in a way like that, I guess. If that makes sense.
I just want to touch on briefly. I read one of your essays, and you touch on shock comedy and the difference between satire and shock comedy. Why are you so against shock comedy, and what do you think the line is between satire and shock comedy is?
I just think shock comedy is piggybacking on terrible stuff that is terrible and just being like, oh, here, I'll just make it more terrible by throwing salt in the wound. You know what I mean?
Right.
I just think it feels hacky to me to sort of piggyback on someone hurting. I think satire and effective comedy comes from not kicking the little guy when he's down. It's going after the big guy who's in a position of power and sort of maybe needs to be taken down a few pegs, maybe, keep, that overarching power in check with a little joke or whatever. I just think it's an abuse of comedy and of the power that comes from being a comedian to go after someone who doesn't deserve it and just being like, haha, remember that time you did that thing and it really hurt? I'm going to talk about that and just poke at your wound. You know what I mean? That's the main issue for me, I would say.
Now, just jumping to something a little different.
Sure.
There are a lot of people who say, oh, women aren't funny. I remember reading a Christopher Hitchens article in Vanity Fair, and he's like, women don't have to be funny, women are objectively unfunny. As a woman in comedy, how does that make you feel, and how do you sort of deal with this like blatant misogyny?
It's interesting because I find that the misogyny that I face in comedy now is really subtle, and it's really sort of internalized and institutionalized in a way that maybe men don't know that they're being misogynistic kind of thing. So it's challenging to talk about, but the nice thing about comedians is that we're relatively open-minded, so you can sort of sit down with another comedian and be like, hey, remember when you did that thing? That wasn't so cool. And they're like, oh, I didn't even know I was doing that thing. That's crazy. In terms of the Christopher Hitchens article, though, I just think his argument really is that biologically speaking, women don't have to be funny because they're not, like, it's a mating thing. Like, guys have to be funny to attract women. And it's like, my main issue with that is like, just because you don't have to be funny doesn't mean you aren't funny. You know what I mean? It's just the quantum leap that doesn't work for me. Yeah, I guess that touches on that.
And I just wanted to touch on something very, very quickly.
Totally.
Just like YouTube comments and stuff, and just people, that sort of misogyny there. How do you sort of deal with that?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I have terrible commenters. Obviously, everyone on the internet does. But I also have so many awesome people who are just out there being like, hey, and I'm like, oh my God, you're so cool. I just want to be your friend. So focusing on the positive, I would say, is what I do.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you. That's all the time we have. Back to you, Lee.